The wind howled through the pines like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of another brutal Sierra winter. Eliza Blackwood pulled her worn woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stared out the frost-covered window of her cabin, watching the first heavy snowflakes of December begin their relentless descent. The year was 1874, and she had survived 2 winters alone in this godforsaken place since Samuel's death. 2 winters of silence, save for the wind and the distant howl of wolves that prowled the ridgelines after dark. The cabin sat perched on a rocky outcrop halfway up the mountain, miles from the nearest town of Cedar Falls. Samuel had chosen this spot deliberately, isolated, defensible, with clear sight lines in every direction. A rancher needed to see trouble coming, he'd always said, but in the end, all his precautions hadn't saved him from a bullet in the back during a dispute over water rights down in the valley. Eliza moved away from the window, her boots echoing hollowly on the rough pine boards. At 32, she was still young by frontier standards, but the mountain had aged her. Her once soft hands were now calloused from chopping wood and hauling water. Her auburn hair, which Samuel had loved to see loose around her shoulders, stayed bound in a severe bun. There was no one to look pretty for anymore, and prettiness was a luxury she couldn't afford. The fire in the stone hearth was burning low. She added another log, watching the sparks spiral up the chimney. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, thick curtains of white that would soon close off the mountain passes until spring. She should feel safe in this isolation, but instead, a familiar dread settled in her stomach. Winter meant being truly alone, cut off from even the possibility of human contact. She tried not to think about Samuel on nights like this, but the memories came anyway, his rough hands on her throat, the smell of whiskey on his breath when he'd rage about losing cattle to wolves or Indians, the way his eyes would go cold and flat when she disagreed with him about anything, the placement of the vegetable garden, the color of fabric for new curtains, whether they needed children yet. The bruises had always healed by the time they went to town for supplies. She'd become expert at long sleeves and high collars, at keeping her eyes downcast when the other ranchers' wives tried to make conversation. They must have known, but no one ever said anything. A man's business with his wife was his own affair in these parts. She'd thought about leaving so many times, had even packed a bag once, planning to slip away while he was out checking the trap lines. But he'd come back early, found her with the carpet bag in her hands. The beating that followed had left her unable to walk for 3 days. After that, she'd never tried again. And then one day, he simply hadn't come home. A neighbor found him face down in Widow's Creek, a bullet between his shoulder blades. The sheriff had questioned her, of course, but she'd been in town that day, buying flour and coffee at Harkin's General Store. 6 people had seen her. The murder was attributed to claim jumpers or possibly Indians, though the local tribes had been peaceful for years. Eliza touched the rifle propped beside the door, a Winchester .73 that had belonged to Samuel. She'd taught herself to shoot after his death, spending hours firing at targets until her shoulder was purple with bruising from the recoil. Every night, she loaded it and kept it within reach. The mountain was full of dangers: bears, wolves, men who might think a widow alone was easy prey. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters. She'd need to check the barn before the storm got worse, make sure the horses had enough hay and the chickens were secure in their coop. The thought of venturing out into the growing blizzard made her shoulders tense, but it had to be done. This was her life now, an endless cycle of chores that kept her alive but barely living. She was reaching for her heavy coat when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the settling snow. Hoofbeats, slow, labored, coming up the trail. Her hand went immediately to the rifle. No one came up here, especially not with a storm rolling in. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles away, and he had no reason to visit. Eliza killed the lantern, plunging the cabin into darkness save for the dying fire. She positioned herself beside the window, rifle ready. The hoofbeats grew closer, accompanied now by the sound of harsh breathing, whether from horse or rider, she couldn't tell. Through the swirling snow, she could make out a dark shape, a horse, head hanging low, stumbling with exhaustion, and slumped over its neck, a figure in a long coat. The horse made it as far as the porch steps before its legs gave out. It went down hard, throwing its rider into the snow. The man didn't get up. Eliza waited, counting her breaths. 1 minute, 2. The figure remained motionless, snow already beginning to cover the dark coat. The horse struggled to its feet and wandered toward the barn, seeking shelter by instinct. This could be a trick. She'd heard of bandits using such deceptions to get inside isolated homesteads, but the way the man had fallen, the boneless sprawl of his limbs, no one was that good an actor. She crept onto the porch, rifle at her shoulder. "Hey!" she called out. "You alive?" No response. The snow was falling so thick now she could barely see 10 feet. If she left him out there, he'd be dead within the hour. But bringing a stranger into her home... As she stood frozen with indecision, the man stirred slightly, a low groan escaping his lips. In the dim light, she could see dark stains on the snow beneath him. "Blood! Damn it!" she whispered. Samuel would have left him to die. Samuel would have said it wasn't their problem, that helping strangers only brought trouble. But Samuel was dead, and she was tired of living by his rules, still keeping the rifle trained on the fallen figure. She descended the porch steps. Up close, she could see he was a big man, broad-shouldered beneath the coat. His face was turned away, obscured by a week's growth of beard and the angle of his fall. More blood had soaked through his shirt, spreading across his left side. She couldn't drag him far, but she couldn't leave him either. With effort, she managed to roll him onto his back. His eyes fluttered open, gray as the storm clouds, unfocused with pain. "Help," he whispered, and then his eyes rolled back. It took her nearly 20 minutes to drag him inside, stopping every few feet to rest and readjust her grip. He was heavier than Samuel had been, all muscle and bone. By the time she got him near the fire, her dress was soaked with sweat despite the cold, and her back screamed in protest. She knew she should tie him up, at least until she knew who he was and why he'd come here. But the blood was still flowing from his side, and whatever else she'd become in these mountains, she wasn't a murderer by neglect. With Samuel's sharp knife, she cut away the stranger's shirt. The wound was ugly, a deep gash along his ribs, too ragged to be from a bullet. A knife wound, maybe, or could be from a fall onto sharp rocks. She'd sewn up enough of Samuel's injuries to know what to do, though her hands shook as she threaded the needle. The stranger stirred as she worked, groaning when she poured whiskey over the wound to clean it. His hands shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "Easy," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm trying to help you." Those gray eyes focused on her face. "Where?" "You're in my cabin." "Your horse brought you here." She gently pulled her wrist free. "Now hold still unless you want to bleed to death on my floor." He studied her for a long moment, then relaxed back. Though she could see the tension in his jaw, she continued stitching. When she was done, she bandaged the wound and covered him with a quilt. "There's water here," she said, setting a cup within reach. "And some bread if you can manage it." "Thank you." His voice was rough, educated, not the drawl of a local rancher. "I'm sorry to impose. You can be sorry later. Right now, you need to rest." She retreated to the rocking chair by the window, the rifle across her lap. "We'll talk about who you are and why you're here when you're stronger." He was already fading back into unconsciousness, but she thought she saw him nod. Outside, the storm had become a full blizzard, sealing them both inside this cabin with its shadows and secrets. Eliza watched the stranger sleep, noting the quality of his boots, the gun belt she'd removed and placed well out of reach. Everything about him spoke of money and purpose. Men like that didn't end up bleeding in mountain cabins by accident. She thought of the loaded rifle in her lap, of the questions that would come with morning, of the careful lies she'd constructed around her life. 2 winters of solitude had made her forget how dangerous the truth could be. But for now, there was only the storm and the stranger and the dying fire. She added another log and settled in to watch, to wait. Whatever came next, she'd survived worse, The mountain had taught her that much. The wind screamed through the pines, and somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, long and mournful, a sound that spoke of hunger and the savage patience of wild things. The stranger's fever broke on the third day. Eliza had spent those days in a wary routine, tending his wound, spooning broth between his cracked lips, always keeping the rifle within reach. She'd searched his belongings while he slept, finding little beyond spare ammunition, a leather-bound journal filled with cryptic notes, and a worn photograph of a woman and 2 children that he kept tucked in his coat pocket. When his gray eyes finally cleared and focused on her, she was splitting kindling by the hearth. He tried to sit up, winced, and thought better of it. "How long?" His voice was still rough but stronger. 3 days. She didn't look at him, concentrating on the rhythm of the hatchet. "The storm's passed, but there's 4 feet of snow blocking the trails. You're not going anywhere for a while." He absorbed this information quietly. "My horse? In the barn, eating me out of hay, but he'll live." She set aside the hatchet and faced him. "Now that you're awake, we need to talk about payment. I'm not running a charity." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered features. "Fair enough. What did you have in mind?" "Work, soon as you can stand. You'll earn your keep. Wood needs splitting, roof needs patching before the next storm, and the chicken coop's half collapsed." She crossed her arms. "Unless you've got silver to spare, work it is." He shifted, testing his mobility. "Name's Boone Matheson." She'd already known his name from the journal but kept that to herself. "Eliza Blackwood. Widow Blackwood," he corrected gently. "I noticed the wedding band." Her hand went unconsciously to the simple gold ring she still wore. 2 years now. I'm sorry for your loss." She shrugged, uncomfortable with sympathy. "The mountain takes what it wants. You learn to live with it, or you leave." Over the following days, as Boone slowly regained his strength, an uneasy rhythm developed between them. He insisted on helping despite his injury, first with small tasks like mending harnesses and sharpening tools, then gradually taking on heavier work. Eliza found herself watching him from the corners of her eyes, noting how he moved with the controlled grace of a man accustomed to violence, how his eyes constantly assessed exits and angles. One morning, she found him examining the wall near the kitchen, running his fingers along the newer planks that didn't quite match the rest. "Storm damage," she said quickly. "Had to replace some boards last spring." He nodded, but she caught the flicker of doubt in his eyes. That evening, she noticed him studying the heavy rug beneath the dining table, the way it sat slightly uneven on the floor. "You ask a lot of questions without using words," she said, setting down his supper with more force than necessary. "Occupational hazard." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm a curious man by nature. Curiosity's dangerous in these parts. So is secrets." They stared at each other across the table, the lantern light throwing shadows that made his face look carved from stone. Finally, he picked up his fork and began eating, but the tension remained, crackling between them like static before a storm. As the days passed and his wound healed, Boone proved himself useful in ways Samuel never had been. He repaired the barn door that had hung crooked for years, reinforced the chicken coop against predators, and split enough wood to last 2 months. He worked with quiet efficiency, never complaining about the pain she knew he must still feel. One afternoon, while he was on the roof patching holes, Eliza allowed herself to really look at him. Tall and lean, with dark hair shot through with premature gray, and hands that showed both strength and surprising gentleness when he'd helped her free a chicken tangled in wire. She guessed him to be near 40, though the sun and wind had weathered him in that way of all frontier men. That evening, as they shared a meal of venison stew, he surprised her by speaking of his past. "Had a family once," he said, staring into his cup of coffee. "Wife named Mary. 2 boys. We had a small farm in Kansas, nothing fancy, but it was ours." She waited, sensing there was more. "Jayhawkers came through in '63, said we were Confederate sympathizers, which was a lie. I was away, helping a neighbor bring in his harvest. His voice went flat. Found them when I got home. What was left of them. I'm sorry, she whispered, understanding now the photograph in his pocket, the shadows that lived behind his eyes. After that, I learned to hunt, started working for the law when I needed to, private interests when I didn't. He looked up at her. Been chasing ghosts ever since, I suppose. She thought of her own ghosts, the ones that walked these rooms at night. The mountains full of them. They sat in companionable silence until she worked up the courage to ask, "What brought you here? This isn't exactly on the way to anywhere." His hesitation was answer enough. He was investigating something, probably connected to Samuel's death or the rumors of hidden gold claims in these hills. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. Following a lead, he said finally. Man named Calvin Torrance? Know him? She kept her face carefully neutral. Heard the name. He had dealings with my husband. I haven't seen him since. She let the sentence trail off. Since your husband died? Thereabouts. Boone nodded slowly. Torrance went missing 2 years ago. His family hired me to find out what happened. Her mouth went dry, but she forced herself to take a calm sip of coffee. Torrance was moldering in the root cellar, or what was left of him was... Samuel had killed him over a card game, brought the body home in the middle of the night, and forced her to help hide it. She could still remember the weight of those dead limbs, the metallic smell of blood mixed with earth. That night, unable to sleep, she heard Boone moving around quietly, through a crack in her bedroom door. She watched him examine the locked cellar entrance. Though he didn't try to force it, he was building a case. She realized, gathering evidence before making his move. The next morning brought a thaw. Icicles dripped from the eaves, and patches of muddy ground showed through the snow. Over breakfast, Boone announced he was well enough to start earning his keep properly. That cellar door needs fixing, he said casually. Notice the lock's rusted through. Could be dangerous if it breaks. It's fine, she said too quickly. Just old preserved goods down there. Nothing worth the trouble. He studied her for a long moment. If you say so. They worked side by side that day, mucking out the barn in tense silence, as the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered peaks orange and red. Something in Eliza finally broke. You know, don't you? She set down the pitchfork, exhaustion in every line of her body. About Torrance. Boone leaned against the barn wall. I suspect, but suspicion isn't knowledge. What do you want from me? The truth would be a start, she laughed bitterly. The truth? The truth is that men like Samuel and Torrance thought women were property, things to be used, traded, beaten when they didn't behave right. Her voice rose. The truth is that I've got scars in places you can't see, and memories that make those scars look like nothing. Eliza! No! She was trembling now. Years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. You want to know what's in that cellar? Fine, but first you're going to hear why. And she told him about the beatings that started 3 months after their wedding. About the time Samuel had held her head under water in the wash basin until she passed out. About the night Torrance came to collect on a poker debt. And Samuel, drunk and mean, had offered her as payment. I fought, she said, her voice steady now. Fought hard enough that Torrance gave up, said I wasn't worth the trouble. Samuel was furious, beat me so bad I couldn't get out of bed for a week. Then Torrance came back. Said he'd changed his mind. They fought. Samuel shot him right there in my kitchen. Boone's face was unreadable in the dying light. Samuel made me help bury him. Said if anyone found out, he'd tell them I did it. Who would believe me over him? She met Boone's eyes. 2 months later, Samuel was dead in Widow's Creek. And no, before you ask, I didn't kill him, though God knows I thought about it enough times. They stood there in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses. 2 damaged people carrying the weight of their histories. Show me, Boone said quietly. She led him to the cellar, her hands shaking as she worked the rusty lock. The wooden steps creaked under their weight. In the far corner, barely visible in the lantern light, was the disturbed earth and hastily stacked stones. Boone studied the makeshift grave for a long time. "His family deserves to know," he said finally. "And then what? They'll want justice. There'll be questions, a trial maybe. You think anyone will believe Samuel forced me to help? You think they'll care?" Her voice broke. "I'll hang for this." He turned to face her, and in the flickering light, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Understanding. Maybe even compassion. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe Calvin Torrance just disappeared. Maybe he ran off to California or got killed by claim jumpers. Maybe there's nothing in this cellar but old preserves and a nervous widow's imagination." She stared at him. "You'd do that? Lie?" "I've done worse for worse reasons." He started up the stairs, then paused. "But I need something from you in return." Her heart sank. Here it was. The price. Men always had a price. "I need you to trust me." He said, "Whatever happened to your husband, whoever killed him, I'm not here for that. But I need to know you won't put a bullet in my back while I'm sleeping. I could have done that 10 times over while you were fevered." "True." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "Guess that'll have to be good enough?" That night, for the first time since he'd arrived, Eliza slept without the rifle beside her bed, and in the morning, when she found him making coffee and flapjacks in her kitchen, humming an old cavalry tune under his breath, something loosened in her chest. Not quite trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Outside. The thaw continued. Water ran in rivulets down the mountain, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the ice breaking up in the creek. Change was coming, whether she wanted it or not. March brought false spring to the mountains, days of warm sun that melted the snow into rushing streams, followed by bitter nights that turned everything to ice. Boone had been at the cabin for nearly 6 weeks now, and the temporary arrangement had taken on an unsettling permanence. He'd written a letter to the Torrance family, Eliza watching as he crafted careful lies about trails going cold and the likelihood that Calvin had met his end somewhere in the vast wilderness. She'd mailed it on her monthly trip to Cedar Falls for supplies, her hands trembling as she handed it to the postmaster. "Staying busy up there, Mrs. Blackwood?" old Henry at the general store had asked, loading sacks of flour into her wagon. "Heard tell you got help with the place now." News traveled fast in the mountains. "Hired a hand for the winter work," she'd replied, keeping her voice neutral. Man needed work. I needed help. Nothing more to it. But there was more to it, and that was the problem. In the evenings now, they sat by the fire like some long-married couple, Boone reading from one of her few books while she mended clothes or worked on a quilt. Sometimes they talked, careful conversations about safe topics like horses and weather and the best way to smoke venison. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, the pop of the fire and the wind outside the only sounds. She found herself noticing things she shouldn't, the way he absently rubbed his shoulder where an old bullet wound ached in the cold, how he always made sure she served herself first at meals, a small courtesy Samuel had never bothered with, the careful way he maintained distance between them, never crowding her in the small cabin. One evening, as she struggled with a particularly stubborn knot in her sewing, he reached over to help. Their fingers brushed, and she jerked back as if burned. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, returning to his side of the hearth. "No, She set down the sewing, frustrated with herself. "I'm not used to kindness from men. It makes me suspicious." "That's probably wise." She looked at him then, really looked. "Are you kind?" Boone Matheson. He considered the question seriously. "I try to be. Doesn't always work out that way." He met her eyes. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Tracking men for money isn't gentle work. But you let Torrance's family believe a lie. Sometimes a lie is kinder than the truth." She thought about that as she prepared for bed. Through her door, she could hear him banking the fire, checking the locks, habits of a careful man. Samuel had never locked doors. Too arrogant to believe anyone would dare rob him. But Boone understood that the real dangers often came invited inside. The next morning brought trouble in the form of Jack Hollis, Samuel's former partner in several ventures she'd preferred not to know about. She recognized his roan mare picking its way up the muddy trail and felt her stomach drop. "Company coming," she told Boone, who was repairing a bridle in the barn. He moved to the door, studying the approaching rider. "Friend of yours?" "Of my husband's, Jack Hollis. He's—" She searched for the right word. "Persistent." Boone's hand moved casually to his gun belt. "Want me to make myself scarce?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "No, stay close." Hollis dismounted with the easy grace of a man who lived in the saddle, his pale eyes taking in the improved state of the property. "Eliza." He touched his hat brim. "Looking well." "Jack." She kept her voice cool. "What brings you up here? Can't a man check on his late partner's widow?" His gaze slid to Boone, "Though I see you've got that handled." "This is Mr. Matheson. He's helping with the heavy work." She didn't like the calculating look in Hollis's eyes. "Was there something you needed?" "Matter of fact, there is." Hollis leaned against the porch rail, making himself comfortable. "Sam had some papers belonging to me, business documents. Thought I'd collect them." She knew exactly what papers he meant, deeds and claims that weren't entirely legal, proof of dealings that would interest the territorial marshal. Samuel had kept them as insurance. "I don't know anything about any papers." Hollis's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Eliza, Sam told me where he kept them, in that false bottom drawer in his desk. Why don't you be a good girl and fetch them? The lady said she doesn't know about any papers." Boone stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between them. "Maybe you should take her at her word. Don't believe I was talking to you, friend." Hollis's hand dropped to his gun. "This is between me and Mrs. Blackwood." The air went thick with tension. Eliza had seen enough violence to recognize the moment before it exploded. "I burned them," she said quickly. "All of Samuel's papers. After he died, didn't want any of his troubles following me." Hollis's face darkened. "You stupid woman. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? About as much as Samuel cost me. I reckon—" The words came out before she could stop them. "Now get off my land." "Your land?" Hollis laughed, ugly and sharp. "Sam won this place in a card game. Probably cheated to get it. Knowing him, you think you've got clear title? You think you own anything at all?" The blood drained from her face. She'd always wondered how Samuel had afforded the cabin, the land. He'd said it was a legitimate purchase, but she should have known better. "Show me the competing claim," Boone said calmly. "Show me any legal document that disputes Mrs. Blackwood's ownership." "Don't need to. Everyone knows what everyone knows, and what can be proved in court are different things." Boone's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd testified many times. "You want to challenge a widow's claim to her home? Take it to a judge. Otherwise, move along." Hollis looked between them, calculation in his pale eyes. "This isn't over. Sam owed me, and that debt didn't die with him." After he'd ridden away, Eliza sank onto the porch steps, shaking. Boone sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "Is it true?" she asked. "About the cabin? Does it matter? You've lived here 2 years, improved the property, paid the taxes, in most territories. That's enough for a claim." He paused. "Though it might be worth checking the courthouse records, just to be sure." She laughed bitterly. "And if Hollis is right, if I've been squatting on someone else's land all this time, then we deal with it, one problem at a time." "We," such a small word to carry so much weight. She looked at him, this man who'd arrived dying on her doorstep and somehow become her defender. "Why are you helping me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything. Maybe because you helped me when you didn't have to." He stood, offering her his hand. "Or maybe I'm just too stubborn to let a snake like Hollis win." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. For a moment they stood there, closer than they'd ever been, and she could see flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Then a rifle crack split the air, and the window behind them exploded in a shower of glass. "Get inside." Boone shoved her through the door as another shot splintered the porch rail where they'd been standing. He rolled in after her, drawing his Colt in one smooth motion. "Where?" she gasped, grabbing her own rifle. "Ridge to the north. Saw the muzzle flash." He moved to the broken window, careful to stay low. "Good news is it's too far for accurate shooting. Bad news is we're pinned down." Another shot, this one hitting the door. Eliza's mind raced. The ridge gave a clear view of the front of the cabin, but the back was partially shielded by the barn. "There's a deer trail out back," she said. "Leads around to the east. If one of us could get to it." "I'll go." He was already moving. "Cover me from the side window. And Eliza," he paused at the back door, "if something happens, you get to that horse and ride for town. Don't look back." Before she could protest, he was gone, disappearing into the scraggly pines behind the cabin. She moved to the window, saw a figure on the ridge, not Hollis, someone smaller. She fired, not hoping to hit at this distance, but to keep the shooter occupied. Minutes crawled by. More shots from the ridge, her own careful return fire. Then, sudden silence. She waited, heart hammering, until she saw Boone emerge on the ridge, his rifle trained on a prone figure. By the time she reached them, he'd already tied the shooter's hands. It was a young man she didn't recognize, bleeding from a gash on his temple. "Hollis paid me $50. The kid gasped. "Said to scare you off, make you want to sell, wasn't supposed to kill nobody." "Well, you nearly did." Boone hauled him to his feet. "You're going to Cedar Falls to have a chat with the sheriff, and you're going to tell him exactly who hired you." They made a strange procession down the mountain, Boone and the wounded gunman on horseback, Eliza driving the wagon. By the time they reached town, word had already spread. The sheriff, a decent man named Tom Bradley, took their statements with growing anger. "I've been looking for an excuse to run Hollis out of the territory," he said. "This ought to do it. You press charges, Mrs. Blackwood, and I'll see he answers for this." The courthouse was across from the sheriff's office, and on impulse, Eliza asked to check the land records. What she found made her knees weak with relief. The deed was in Samuel's name, properly filed and legal. "Told you," Boone said quietly. "Whatever else your husband was, he wasn't stupid enough to live on disputed land." That night, they stayed in town at the boarding house, separate rooms as propriety demanded. But Eliza couldn't sleep, too aware of Boone just across the hall, of how quickly he'd risked himself for her safety. Near dawn, she heard his door open. Through her window, she watched him walk to the edge of town, standing there like he was measuring the distance to the horizon. She understood the look on his face, the restlessness of someone who'd been in one place too long. When they returned to the cabin the next day, something had shifted between them. The violence had stripped away pretense, left them raw and aware of each other in new ways. They worked to repair the damage in charged silence, hands accidentally touching as they cleared broken glass, eyes meeting and holding a beat too long. That evening, as she cooked dinner, he came up behind her to reach for a plate. She could feel the heat of him, smell the leather and pine soap scent that had become familiar. For a moment, neither moved. "Eliza," he said, voice rough. She turned, found herself trapped between him and the stove. His hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched the bruise on her cheek where flying glass had caught her. "I'm all right," she whispered. "I know." His thumb traced the edge of the bruise with impossible tenderness. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met." She should step away, should remember all the reasons this was dangerous. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, starved for gentleness after so many years of its absence. "Boone, I know." He stepped back, hand dropping. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. No." She caught his hand. Don't apologize. Just give me time. I need time. He squeezed her fingers gently, then let go. Time you've got. But even as he said it, they both knew it was a lie. Spring was coming fast now, and with it the open roads that would call him away. Time was the one thing they didn't have, that night. She lay awake listening to him move restlessly in the main room, and wondered if he was fighting the same battle she was, between what was safe and what was wanted, between the past that haunted and a future that beckoned with terrifying possibility. Outside, a wolf howled, long and mournful. Another answered from across the valley. Even the wild things, she thought, didn't want to be alone. The late March blizzard came without warning, turning the world white again just when the crocuses had begun to push through the mud. Eliza woke to howling wind and snow so thick she couldn't see the barn from the window. The temperature had plummeted overnight, and frost painted elaborate patterns on the glass. "Looks like winter's not done with us yet," Boone said from the stove, where he was coaxing life back into the fire. They'd fallen into easy domesticity these past weeks, sharing the morning chores without discussion. "I need to check the animals." She reached for her coat, but he stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Already done. Fed and watered before the worst of it hit." He poured coffee, handed her a cup. "We might be stuck here a few days. Hope you don't mind the company." She took the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "Seems I'm getting used to it." They spent the morning in companionable activity, Eliza baking bread and preparing a stew from the preserved vegetables in the pantry, Boone mending tack and sharpening tools. The storm created a strange intimacy, sealing them away from the world in their small shelter. By afternoon, the wind had reached a shriek. The cabin groaned under the assault, and snow began forcing its way through tiny gaps in the walls. They worked together to stuff rags in the cracks, their bodies close in the confined space. "There," Boone said, pressing cloth into a gap near the window. "That should—" The wood gave a sharp crack, and suddenly a section of roof beam split. Snow and wind poured through the opening. "Get the tarp from the barn!" Eliza shouted over the storm's roar. But even as she said it, she knew it was impossible. The barn was invisible in the white fury outside. Anyone who ventured out would be lost in seconds. Boone was already moving, dragging the heavy table beneath the break. "Help me with this!" Together they lifted a wooden chest onto the table, Boone climbing up to hold a blanket over the gap, while Eliza handed him tools and boards. His shirt was soaked through in minutes, the cold vicious at that height. "You need to get down," she called. "You'll freeze!" Almost got it, but she could see him shivering violently, his fingers clumsy with cold as he hammered boards across the break. When he finally climbed down, his lips were blue and he was shaking so hard he could barely stand. Without thinking, Eliza began unbuttoning his wet shirt. "Need to get you warm," she said. "All business now. These wet clothes will kill you faster than any bullet." He was too cold to protest as she stripped him to the waist, wrapping him in blankets and pushing him toward the fire. She heated water, made him drink cup after cup of hot tea liberally laced with whiskey. Gradually, the shaking subsided. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice hoarse. She sat beside him on the floor before the fire, their shoulders touching through the blanket. "You saved my cabin. Least I could do. Would have been a cold night without a roof." They sat quietly, listening to the storm rage outside. The firelight played across his bare chest where the blanket had slipped, revealing old scars, a puckered bullet wound near his shoulder, knife marks along his ribs, the newer scar from his recent injury still pink and healing. "You've lived a hard life," she said softly. "Haven't we all?" He pulled the blanket higher. "Each scar's got a story. Some I earned, some I deserved. And that one." She indicated a long mark across his collarbone. "Comanche raid, summer of '71. I was scouting for the army then." He touched the scar absently. "Young warrior, couldn't have been more than 16. I didn't want to kill him, but—" He shrugged. "Sometimes there's no choice. Samuel used to say killing got easier with practice." She stared into the fire. "Is that true?" "No." His answer was immediate. It gets heavier. Each one adds weight, until sometimes you feel like you're carrying stones in your chest. He looked at her. That boy in my photograph, my oldest, he'd be about that warrior's age now, if he'd lived. The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded, without thinking. Eliza reached over and took his hand. He turned it palm up, interlacing their fingers. I dream about them sometimes. He continued. Mary and the boys. They're always asking why I wasn't there, why I didn't protect them. It wasn't your fault. Knowing and feeling are different things. He squeezed her hand gently. What do you dream about? She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, water. I dream about drowning. Samuel used to, when I displeased him. He'd hold my head under, in the wash basin, the horse trough, once in the creek. Said he was teaching me respect. Boone's hand tightened on hers. Eliza. I learned to hold my breath, to go limp, play dead. Sometimes that made him stop. She laughed bitterly. The night he died. There was a storm like this. He went out to check some traps, never came back. They found him face down in Widow's Creek, water barely knee-deep. Everyone said he must have slipped, hit his head, but sometimes I wonder if the mountain decided to give him what he'd given me. They sat in silence while the wind howled and the fire crackled. Finally, Boone spoke. The man who did that to you is gone. He can't hurt you anymore. Can't he? She turned to face him. Every time a man raises his voice, I flinch. Every time someone moves too fast, I reach for a weapon. I keep that rifle loaded because I'm terrified someone will come in the night. Even though there's nobody left to come. He's dead, but he's still here. She touched her temple. Still drowning me. Boone shifted, turning to face her fully. With his free hand, he gently tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes. You survived him. That takes a strength most people don't have. And every day you choose to keep going. You prove he didn't break you. Sometimes I feel broken. We're all broken somehow. But broken things can still be beautiful. Still be strong. He released her chin but didn't move away. You saved my life. Eliza, a broken person couldn't have done that. The space between them seemed to shrink. She could see the firelight reflected in his eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Fear and something else warring in her chest. Boone, she whispered. I know, he said. I won't. I wouldn't. But she was already leaning forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss was tentative, almost chaste, a question more than a statement. He held perfectly still, letting her control it, and something about that gentleness undid her more than passion would have. When she pulled back, they were both breathing unsteadily. I'm sorry, she started, but he shook his head. Don't apologize. Not for that. The storm chose that moment to intensify, sending something crashing against the side of the cabin. They both startled, the spell broken. Eliza stood quickly, needing distance. I should check the supplies, she said. Make sure we have enough water melted, in case. Eliza. His voice stopped her. We don't have to talk about it, but don't run from me, please. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and busied herself with unnecessary tasks while he dressed in dry clothes. The rest of the evening passed in careful normalcy. Dinner, conversation about safe topics, each of them pretending the air wasn't charged with new awareness. That night, the storm grew worse. The repaired roof held, but barely. Eliza lay in her bed listening to the wind try to tear the cabin apart, unable to sleep. Near midnight, a tremendous crash shook the entire structure. She bolted upright, reaching for the rifle. Boone appeared in her doorway, fully dressed. Tree came down, hit the corner of the roof. Even in the dim light, she could see his grim expression. It's bad. They spent the next hours in desperate battle against the elements. The tree had torn away part of the wall, and snow poured in faster than they could block it. They moved what they could to the far side of the cabin, creating a smaller shelter within the structure. By dawn, exhausted and frozen, They huddled together in the one corner that remained fully protected. The blankets weren't enough against the cold seeping in from every direction. Without discussion, Boone wrapped his arms around her, sharing body heat in the most practical way. "Just until the storm passes," he said against her hair. She nodded, too cold and tired to maintain any walls between them. She fit against him like she'd been carved for that space, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong, a rhythm to hold on to while the world tried to tear itself apart outside. "Tell me something," she said through chattering teeth. "Something good. Something that doesn't hurt." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "First time I saw the Pacific Ocean, I was 22, hiring on with a freight company running goods to San Francisco. Came over this rise, and there it was. Blue as heaven and bigger than anything I'd ever imagined. Stood there like a fool for must have been an hour, just watching the waves come in. I've never seen the ocean. Someday you will." His arms tightened around her. "When this is over, when spring really comes, you could leave here, go anywhere, see everything you've missed. And go where? With what money? I have some saved, not much, but enough to start fresh somewhere." He paused. "You could come with me." The words hung between them, enormous in their implications. She pressed her face against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart. "You don't mean that." "I never say things I don't mean." His hand stroked her back gently. "I know it's too soon. I know you have no reason to trust me or any man, but the offer stands." The storm finally began to die as true dawn approached. They dozed fitfully, still wrapped around each other, when a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds and fell across their makeshift shelter. Eliza pulled away slowly, already missing his warmth. In the light, she could see the exhaustion on his face, the stubble darkening his jaw. He looked rough and worn and absolutely solid, like something that could weather any storm. "We should see how bad the damage is," she said. They emerged to find a world transformed. The tree had taken out a third of the cabin's roof and one wall. Snow had drifted halfway up the remaining walls. It would take weeks to repair, if it could be repaired at all. "Oh," Eliza said softly, taking in the destruction of her home, her sanctuary, her prison. Boone's hand found hers. "It can be fixed. We'll start today." "No." She turned to face him, something shifting inside her chest. "No, I don't think I will." He studied her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying." She looked at the ruined cabin, then back at him. "I'm saying maybe the mountain made a choice for me. Maybe it's telling me it's time to go." "Where?" She squeezed his hand. "I don't know, but I think I'd like to see that ocean you talked about." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming the weathered features. "It's a long journey, dangerous in places. You sure you trust me that much?" "I trusted you with the truth about Torrance. I trusted you enough to sleep in your arms last night." She stepped closer. "I think I can trust you with whatever comes next." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs gently tracing her cheekbones. "You sure about this? Once we leave, Eliza Blackwood stays buried here with all her ghosts." She interrupted. "Maybe I'll be Eliza Matheson. Or maybe I'll choose a completely new name. Either way, I won't be the woman who died a little more each day in this cabin." This time, when he kissed her, she didn't pull away. It was a promise sealed between them, witnessed by the mountains and the melting snow and the sun breaking through the clouds. A promise that some things could be rebuilt stronger than before, that some storms cleared the way for new growth. They spent the day salvaging what they could from the cabin, her few precious belongings, the supplies that had survived, anything that could be useful on the journey ahead. As the sun set behind the peaks, they loaded the horses and took one last look at the ruins. "Any regrets?" Boone asked. Eliza thought of Samuel, of Torrance moldering in the cellar, of all the nights she'd lain awake wishing for death or freedom. Then she looked at the man beside her, scarred and steady, and offering her a future she'd never dared imagine. "No," she said. No regrets. They rode down the mountain as stars began to appear in the clear sky, leaving the cabin to the elements and the ghosts. Somewhere ahead lay the ocean, vast and blue and full of possibility. But for now, there was just the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the man beside her, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the worst was finally behind them. The mountain had taken everything, and in doing so, it had set her free. They made camp that first night in a grove of aspens 20 miles down from the ruined cabin. The adrenaline that had carried Eliza through the decision and departure began to fade, replaced by a creeping uncertainty. She sat by their small fire, watching Boone tend the horses, and wondered if she'd lost her mind. "Second thoughts?" he asked, returning to spread his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. "Third and fourth thoughts, too," she admitted. "I've never been further than Cedar Falls, never slept outdoors, never—" She gestured helplessly at the vast darkness beyond their circle of light. "We'll take it slow. No rush to get anywhere." He settled onto his blankets, maintaining that careful distance between them. "Tomorrow we'll reach Millbrook. Has a decent hotel, if you'd rather sleep indoors." She appreciated his thoughtfulness but shook her head. "If I'm doing this, I'm doing it proper. Just don't expect me to be good at it right away." That night, she barely slept. Every sound, the pop of the fire, the rustle of wind and leaves, the distant howl of coyotes, kept her rigid with alertness. Near dawn, exhausted, she finally dozed, only to wake with a start when Boone touched her shoulder. "Easy," he said gently. "Just letting you know I'm going to water the horses." She watched him move around the camp with practiced efficiency, noting how different he seemed out here. In her cabin, he'd adapted to her domestic space. But this, the open sky, the casual vigilance, the economical movements, this was his natural element. They traveled steadily for 3 days, following trails Boone knew from his years of wandering. He taught her things Samuel had never bothered with: how to read weather signs, find north without a compass, which plants could heal and which could kill. She absorbed it all with the desperate attention of someone learning to breathe new air. On the 4th night, camped by a creek swollen with snowmelt, the dreams found her. She was back in the cabin, Samuel's hands holding her under the icy water, her lungs burning, darkness creeping in from the edges. She woke, gasping, clawing at invisible hands. Boone was there instantly, not touching but close enough that she could see his face in the moonlight. "You're safe," he said quietly. "He's gone. You're safe." "I know." Her voice was rough. "I know, but knowing and feeling are different things." He shifted slightly. "Want some coffee? I was about to make some anyway." It was nowhere near morning, but she nodded gratefully. They sat by the rebuilt fire, sipping bitter coffee, not talking about the nightmare or the way her hands still shook. "My Mary loved the stars," Boone said eventually, gazing upward. Knew all their names, the stories behind them. Used to quiz the boys. "What's that one? Thomas? Which way does Polaris point? James's?" His voice carried fond pain. "I never paid enough attention. Wish I had." "Tell me about them. Your boys." He smiled softly. Thomas was 12, all gangly limbs and too much energy. Wanted to be a cavalry officer. Used to practice bugle calls on this god-awful tin horn until the neighbors threatened murder. James was 10, quiet like his mother. Rather read than do chores. Always had his nose in some book. "They sound wonderful." They were. He was quiet for a moment. "What haunts me most is that I can't quite remember James's laugh anymore. I can see his face, remember things he said, but that sound, it's fading." Without thinking, Eliza reached over and took his hand. He squeezed back, and they sat that way until dawn painted the eastern sky pink. The next day brought them to Millbrook as promised. Eliza felt strange riding down an actual street after months of mountain isolation. People stared. A rough-looking man and a woman in a worn dress. Clearly traveling together, but just as clearly maintaining careful propriety. 2 rooms, Boone told the hotel clerk, sliding coins across the desk. The clerk's knowing smirk made Eliza's cheeks burn. But she kept her chin high. Let them think what they wanted. The truth was both more innocent and more complicated than any gossip could capture. Her room was small but clean, with a real bed and a basin of hot water brought up by a maid who eyed her sympathetically. Eliza bathed, washed her hair, put on her one good dress. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. When had she gotten so thin? When had those lines appeared around her eyes? A knock interrupted her self-examination. "Eliza, thought you might be hungry." She opened the door to find Boone cleaned up and freshly shaved, looking almost respectable in a clean shirt. He'd brought dinner, roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread that made her realize how tired she was of trail food. They ate in her room, the door properly propped open for propriety's sake. It felt strange, almost formal after their easy camp intimacy. "I sent a telegram," he said as they finished eating, "to the Torrance family. Told them I was ending my investigation, that their son was surely dead, but the details were lost to time. Thank you. Also sent one to a friend in San Francisco. Asked about work opportunities, places to stay." He paused. "Unless you've changed your mind about the destination?" "No. The ocean still sounds right." She pushed food around her plate. "What kind of work?" "Various things. I've done warehouse security, rode shotgun for Wells Fargo, even taught riding lessons to rich men's sons." He grinned. "That didn't last long, apparently. I lack the proper temperament for dealing with spoiled children." "I can't imagine why," she said dryly. And they both laughed. The first real laughter they'd shared. Later, alone in her room, she lay in the too-soft bed and missed the hard ground, the stars, the sound of Boone's breathing across the fire. It frightened her. How quickly she'd grown accustomed to his presence, in the mountains, focused on survival. She hadn't had time to examine what was happening between them. Now, with time to think, doubt crept in. She'd traded one man for another, hadn't she? Left one trap only to walk into the next. Boone was nothing like Samuel, but men had a way of changing once they felt ownership. The gentle courtesy could become control. The protection could become possession. Near midnight, unable to quiet her racing thoughts, she dressed and slipped out to the hotel's small balcony. The town slept below, peaceful and ordinary. Somewhere a dog barked. A drunk sang off-key as he wove his way home. Couldn't sleep either. She didn't startle, had half expected him to appear. Boone leaned against the railing beside her, jacket loose over his shoulders. "Too quiet," she said. "No wind, no coyotes. Takes some getting used to. Civilization." They stood in comfortable silence until she found the courage to voice her fears. "What happens when we get to San Francisco? What do you want to happen?" "That's not an answer." He turned to face her. "Eliza, I meant what I said about you being free to go anywhere, be anyone. If we get to California and you decide you want to strike out on your own, I'll help you do it. Find you a respectable boarding house. Help you get settled." His voice roughened slightly. "Won't like it, but I'll do it. And if I don't want to be on my own?" Even in the dim light, she could see something flare in his eyes. "Then we figure out what that means. Together." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you, of myself, of making another mistake. We're all scared of something." He moved closer, not touching but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'm terrified you'll realize you deserve better than a worn-out tracker with more ghosts than prospects." "Boone, I dream about them too," he continued. "But lately, there's been other dreams. You and me on that beach I told you about. A little house with a garden, maybe a couple horses. Take folks on rides up the coast. Peaceful dreams. Hadn't had those in years until you." The words hung between them. Precious and dangerous. Eliza felt her careful walls cracking, letting in equal parts hope and terror. "I don't know how to be with someone who doesn't hurt me," she whispered. "Then we'll learn together. Go as slow as you need." He held out his hand, palm up, an offer, not a demand. "Starting now, just holding your hand while we watch the stars your Samuel never bothered to name?" She looked at his hand, scarred, steady, patient, then slowly placed hers in it. His fingers closed gently around hers, and something tight in her chest eased. They stood that way until the eastern sky began to lighten, talking sometimes just being. He told her the names Mary had taught him: Cassiopeia, Orion, the Pleiades. She told him about the first time she'd seen Samuel's true nature, how she'd made excuses for so long, convinced herself it was normal. It wasn't. Boone said firmly, none of it was normal or right or deserved. When they finally parted to return to their rooms, Eliza felt something fundamental had shifted. Not love, not yet. That was too large, too frightening a word. But trust, maybe. The beginning of it. Fragile as new ice, but there all the same. The next days passed in a blur of travel. They left the main roads, following mountain paths Boone knew from his tracking days. The terrain was rough but beautiful, and Eliza found herself growing stronger, more confident in the saddle. Her hands developed new calluses from the rains, her face bronzed under the spring sun. One evening, camped by a lake so still it mirrored the sky perfectly, she surprised them both by laughing at one of his terrible jokes. Not the polite laughter of before, but something full and genuine that seemed to startle the birds from the trees. "There," Boone said softly. "There you are?" "What do you mean?" "The woman you were before he tried to drown her. She's been there all along, just waiting." That night, she spread her bedroll closer to his, not touching, but close enough to hear his breathing, to know she wasn't alone. He reached out once in sleep, his hand finding hers, and she let their fingers intertwine. She dreamed of water again, but this time it was the ocean, vast and blue and calling her home. The next morning brought rain, soft at first but steadily increasing until they were forced to seek shelter in an abandoned line shack. It was rough. One room, a leaky roof, gaps in the walls, but better than drowning in the downpour. They spent the day waiting out the storm, playing cards with a worn deck Boone carried, telling stories. She found herself talking about her childhood, before Samuel, the father who'd died young, the mother who'd remarried badly, the stepbrother who'd seen her as property to be traded for drinking money. "Samuel paid $50 and 2 horses for me," she said matter-of-factly. "My stepbrother thought he'd made a fine bargain." Boone's jaw tightened, but he just dealt another hand. His loss, man who'd trade family for horses, doesn't deserve either. As evening approached, the rain finally stopped. They ventured out to find the world washed clean, everything shining and new. A rainbow arced across the valley below them, so perfect it looked painted. Mary would have called that a sign. Boone said, "Good things coming. Do you believe in signs?" "I believe in taking hope where you find it." He looked at her. "I believe in second chances and new beginnings and women strong enough to save themselves." She kissed him then, standing there in the mud with the rainbow overhead and their future spread out below them like a map waiting to be drawn. It was different from before, not tentative but sure, not a question but an answer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "Eliza." "I know," she said. "I know what this means. I know what I'm choosing." That night, she spread her bedroll next to his, their bodies close enough to share warmth, but nothing more. They lay looking up at the stars through the cleared clouds, hands clasped between them. "Tell me again about the ocean," she said. So he did, painting pictures with words of blue vastness and salt air and waves that never stopped reaching for the shore. And somewhere between his voice and the stellar light and the solid warmth of his hand in hers, Eliza felt the last of her walls come down. She'd left the mountain as Eliza Blackwood, widow and victim and keeper of terrible secrets. But she was becoming someone new now, someone who laughed at bad jokes and slept under stars and kissed a good man without fearing what came after. The ocean was still weeks away, California a distant dream. There would be more storms, more nights when the ghosts came calling. But for now, there was this, the clean rain smell and the impossible stars and the first real peace she'd known in years. "Eliza," Boone's voice was soft in the darkness. We're going to be all right. She squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. Yes, she said. I believe we are. The riders appeared on the horizon just after dawn, 6 men moving with purpose down the valley trail. Eliza spotted them first, her mountain-trained eyes catching the dust cloud before the figures became clear. Boone, she said quietly, not wanting to show alarm, but needing him to see. He was beside her instantly, shading his eyes against the early sun. His posture shifted subtly, casual to anyone watching but ready for trouble. Could be anyone, he said, but she heard the doubt in his voice. Travelers didn't usually move in groups that large, that organized. They were 3 days out from the last town, camped by a stream in open country. No cover, nowhere to run. Boone moved casually to his horse, checking the saddle while ensuring his rifle was within reach. Pack up, he said. Nice and easy, like we're just getting an early start. But it was too late. The riders had spotted them, were already changing direction. As they drew closer, Eliza's heart sank. The man in front wore a deputy's badge that caught the morning light. Mr. Matheson? The deputy was young, trying to look authoritative despite the nervous way his hand hovered near his gun. Boone Matheson? That's right. Boone stepped slightly forward, placing himself between the riders and Eliza. Something I can help you with? Sir, I'm Deputy Marcus Wells out of Cedar Falls. This here's Sheriff Bradley's posse. He gestured to the other men, all armed, all watching with hard eyes. We need you to come back with us, both of you. On what charge? No charges yet, sir. Just questions need answering. The deputy's eyes flicked to Eliza. About the death of Samuel Blackwood and the disappearance of Calvin Torrance. Eliza felt the world tilt. Beside her, Boone remained perfectly still, but she could sense the calculations running through his mind. 6 men. Open ground. Her safety to consider. I've already filed my report on Torrance, Boone said evenly. Sent it to his family weeks ago. Yes, sir, we know. That's part of what needs discussing. Wells shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Please, Mr. Matheson. Sheriff Bradley asked me to bring you in peaceful like, said you'd cooperate. Tom Bradley's a good man, Boone said after a moment. All right, we'll come. The ride back to Cedar Falls took 2 days, the posse maintaining polite but clear custody. They camped together the first night, the deputies taking shifts on watch. Eliza barely slept, her mind racing through possibilities. Who had talked? What did they know? Boone managed to sit beside her during the evening meal, speaking low while the deputies talked among themselves. Say nothing without me there, he murmured. They're fishing, or they'd have arrested us already. Bradley's giving us a chance, but I don't know why. In Cedar Falls, they were separated immediately. Eliza found herself in a small room in the sheriff's office. Not quite a cell, but clearly not free to leave. Sheriff Bradley came in after an hour, carrying coffee and looking tired. Mrs. Blackwood. He sat across from her, his weathered face unreadable. You want to tell me why Jack Hollis is saying you killed your husband? Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Because I wouldn't give him Samuel's papers, because I had him arrested for trying to kill me. That's what I figured. Bradley sipped his coffee. Thing is, Hollis knows things. Says there's evidence at your cabin. Says you and Matheson have been covering up murders. My cabin was destroyed in the storm. Whatever evidence Hollis thinks exists. The storm damaged the main structure. Bradley interrupted. But that root cellar's intact. Had my boys check. He leaned back, studying her. Found some interesting things down there. She said nothing, remembering Boone's advice. Here's what I think, Bradley continued. I think Samuel Blackwood was a mean son of a bitch who had it coming. I think Calvin Torrance was cut from the same cloth. And I think you're a woman who got caught up in bad business through no fault of your own. Sheriff, I also think Boone Matheson is a good man who's helped me out more than once. Man like that doesn't throw his career away for nothing. He stood. I'm going to talk to him now. You sit tight. Hours passed. Through the small window, Eliza watched the sun cross the sky and begin its descent. Finally, as shadows lengthened across the floor, the door opened. Boone entered, followed by the sheriff. "Tell her," Bradley said. Boone's face was grave. "Hollis is dead. Tried to draw on one of the deputies during questioning. They had to put him down." "Which means," Bradley added, "the primary witness against you is gone. Convenient, some might say." "You think we arranged it?" Eliza couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "No, I think Hollis was stupid and violent and got what he deserved." Bradley moved to the window. "Here's what's going to happen. There's a federal marshal coming up from Denver. Already on his way. Be here tomorrow. He's going to want to investigate everything. Your husband's death, Torrance, all of it." Eliza's throat closed with fear. "But," Bradley continued, "marshals are busy men. If there's nothing to find, nothing to investigate, they tend to move on quick." He turned to face them. "That storm did a lot of damage. Shame how it washed out that old cellar, filled it with mud and rocks. Couldn't dig through that mess without heavy equipment." Understanding dawned. "Sheriff, I've got men up there now, making sure that cellar's good and buried, natural-like, storm damage." He put on his hat. "You two are free to go. I'd suggest you go far." "Tom," Boone started, but Bradley held up a hand. "Sam Blackwood was a blight on this territory. The world's better without him and Torrance both. I'm not going to see a good woman hang for surviving." He moved to the door, then paused. "Matheson, you still got friends among the marshals. Might want to reach out. Smooth the way. And Mrs. Blackwood, that marriage certificate you got? Might be good if it got lost. Widows can't be forced to testify about their husbands, but unmarried women living in sin, that's different." He left them alone in the small room. Eliza sank into a chair, shaking. Boone knelt beside her, taking her hands. "It's all right," he said. "We're all right. He knows. He knows everything. And he's choosing justice over law. There's a difference." He squeezed her hands gently. "But we need to move fast. Get to California before that marshal starts asking questions elsewhere." They left Cedar Falls that night, riding hard under a crescent moon. At a crossroads 10 miles out, Boone suddenly reined in. "What is it?" He dismounted, pulling something from his saddlebag, the marriage certificate she'd mentioned to Bradley. Without a word, he struck a match and held it to the paper. They watched it burn. The last legal tie to Samuel Blackwood turning to ash on the night wind. "There," he said. "Now you're just Eliza, free and clear." The next days blurred together. Hard riding, little sleep, always listening for pursuit that never came. They avoided towns, living on hardtack and dried meat, pushing toward California as if chased by demons, which, Eliza supposed, they were. On the 4th night, exhausted and filthy, they stopped at a way station just over the territorial border. The proprietor, a gap-toothed woman named Madge, asked no questions beyond whether they could pay for a room and a bath. "1 room or 2?" she asked, eyeing them shrewdly. Boone looked at Eliza, leaving the choice to her. "1," she said quietly, and felt him relax beside her. The room was small and clean, with a bed that looked like heaven after nights on the ground. They took turns bathing in the copper tub Madge's son hauled up, the hot water washing away days of dust and fear. When Boone returned from his bath, Eliza was sitting on the bed in her clean shift, brushing out her hair. He stopped in the doorway, something raw crossing his face. "What?" she asked. "You look—" He cleared his throat. "Different, younger, like the weight's finally off." She set down the brush. "I feel different, free, terrified, but free." He crossed to sit beside her, careful not to touch. "Still sure about this? About us?" Instead of answering with words, she turned to face him, bringing one hand up to cup his jaw. His eyes closed at the touch, and she could feel the tension thrumming through him, want and restraint warring visibly. "Eliza," he said roughly. "We don't have to—" "I know." She shifted closer. "But I want to choose something for myself, not have it taken or demanded or bargained for. I want—" She struggled for words. I want to know what it's like when it's right. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. I don't want to hurt you. Don't want to remind you of... You won't. You couldn't. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. You're nothing like him. Boone, nothing. When he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that made her eyes burn. His hands framed her face like she was something precious, something that might break. She was the one who deepened it, who pulled him closer, needing to prove to them both that she wasn't broken, wasn't afraid. Later, lying in the narrow bed with moonlight painting silver across their skin, she traced the scars on his chest, each one a story of survival, of continuing on when everything said to quit. No regrets? He asked, voice rough with emotion. None. She pressed a kiss to the bullet scar near his shoulder. For the first time in my life. None at all. They stayed twined together as dawn approached, talking in whispers about the future, the house by the ocean, the life they'd build. It felt like spinning dreams from spider silk, beautiful and fragile and entirely theirs. A knock at the door shattered the peace. They both tensed, Boone already reaching for his gun. Mr. Matheson? It was Madge's voice, urgent. There's riders coming. Look like law to me. They dressed quickly, efficiently, the ease of the night replaced by familiar tension. Boone peered out the window while Eliza packed their few belongings. 4 men, he reported. Coming fast. The marshal? Maybe. Or maybe Bradley sent word ahead, smoothed things over. He turned from the window. Either way, we need to be gone. Madge met them at the back door, their saddled horses waiting. There's a trail through the hills, she said, pointing west. Rough going, but it'll get you to the California road without being seen. Why help us? Eliza asked. The older woman smiled, gap-toothed and knowing. Been running this place 20 years. I can spot folks running from trouble versus folks who are trouble. You two ain't trouble. She handed Eliza a wrapped bundle. Food for the road. Now get. They rode hard through the dawn, following the trail Madge had indicated. Behind them, no shouts arose. No pursuit materialized. Maybe the riders hadn't been law after all. Maybe Bradley's influence had reached further than they'd hoped. Or maybe they'd just been lucky. By noon, they'd rejoined the main road. 2 more travelers among many heading west. Eliza felt the tension slowly leave her shoulders. They'd made it. They were free. You know, Boone said as they rode, we never settled on what to call you. Can't be Blackwood anymore. She considered, not Matheson either. Not yet. That should mean something more than running from the law. Fair enough. So who are you? She thought of the woman she'd been in the cabin, frightened, trapped, slowly drowning. Then of who she was becoming, someone who laughed at bad jokes and slept under stars and made choices about her own body and heart. I'm Eliza, she said finally. Just Eliza. That's enough for now. He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his weathered features. Nice to meet you. Just Eliza. I'm Boone, and I'm powerfully glad to know you. They rode on toward California, toward the ocean that waited with its endless horizons. Behind them, the mountains held their secrets. A ruined cabin, a buried cellar, the ghost of a woman who'd died a little each day until she'd found the strength to live. Ahead lay the unknown, bright with possibility and threaded with hope. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The California coast appeared through morning fog like something from a dream. Eliza reined in her horse at the cliff's edge, staring at the vast expanse of blue-gray water that stretched to meet the sky. After months of mountains and desert, the sight struck her speechless. There it is, Boone said softly beside her. The Pacific. She could only nod, overwhelmed. The ocean was bigger than her imagination had allowed, endless in a way that made her feel both insignificant and strangely free. Waves crashed against the rocks below, sending spray high into the air where it caught the emerging sunlight like scattered diamonds. They'd made it. 6 weeks of hard travel, dodging questions in towns, always looking over their shoulders. And they'd finally made it. "Now what?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the surf. "Now we find that little house I told you about." He pointed north along the coast. Town called Crescent Bay, about 10 miles up. "My friend Willie Hartman runs a freight business there. Said in his telegram there's work if I want it, and a cottage for rent near the water. A cottage by the sea, a new life. It seemed too simple after everything they'd been through." They followed the coastal road north, the ocean always to their left. Eliza couldn't stop looking at it, the way it changed color with the light. Sometimes green, sometimes gray, sometimes blue as cornflowers. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries mixing with the constant sound of waves. Crescent Bay proved to be a modest town, perched on bluffs above a natural harbor. Fishing boats bobbed at anchor, while larger vessels loaded timber from the nearby mills. The air smelled of salt and pine tar and possibility. Willie Hartman was a bear of a man with graying whiskers and a laugh that shook windows. He pumped Boone's hand enthusiastically, then turned to Eliza with surprising gentleness. "You must be the lady Boone mentioned. Welcome to Crescent Bay." He didn't ask for names or stories, just accepted what Boone had told him, that they were starting fresh. "Come on, I'll show you the cottage. Previous tenants left sudden like last month. Their loss, your gain." The cottage sat on a small rise overlooking the harbor, weathered cedar shingles and white-painted trim. It was tiny, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but clean and furnished with simple necessities. Best of all, from the front window, you could see the ocean spreading endlessly west. Rent's reasonable. Willie said, $20 a month, includes firewood. Works good here if you're not afraid of it. Always need men who can handle horses and freight. Women, too. The hotel's looking for help, and Mrs. Chen runs a laundry service that's always hiring. "We'll take it," Eliza said before Boone could speak. Both men looked at her in surprise, and she felt herself flush. "That is, if." "We'll take it," Boone confirmed, smiling at her certainty. Willie left them with the keys and a promise to come by tomorrow to discuss work. They stood in the small main room, suddenly awkward without the purpose of travel to drive them. "It's perfect," Eliza said, running her hand along the windowsill. "Small, but perfect. You don't have to work." Boone said, "I've got enough saved. I want to." She turned to face him. "I've never earned my own money. Never had something that was mine because I worked for it. I want that." He nodded, understanding. They'd been traveling as partners for weeks now, but this, setting up house together, felt different, more permanent, more like the life they'd whispered about in the darkness. That first week passed in a blur of settling in. Boone started work with Willie, loading and unloading freight wagons, sometimes riding shotgun on deliveries to inland towns. Eliza found employment at Mrs. Chen's laundry, her hands reddening from hot water and lye soap, but her spirit strangely light. The other women at the laundry were curious but polite, accepting her story of being a widow from the mountains. Only Mrs. Chen, a sharp-eyed woman who'd seen more than her share of secrets, seemed to guess at the truth. "You run from something," she said one afternoon, not a question but a statement. "Is okay. Many people come to coast running. Ocean doesn't care about past." In the evenings, Eliza and Boone would walk along the beach, learning the rhythms of their new home, high tide and low tide, the best spots to find shells, which rocks were safe to climb and which would leave you soaked. They talked about everything and nothing, slowly building the foundation of a shared life. But the nights were harder. In the cottage's single bedroom, they maintained a careful distance, as if the passion of that one night at the way station had been a dream. Eliza didn't know how to bridge the gap, how to say she wanted more than this polite companionship. And Boone, ever careful of her boundaries, waited for signals she didn't know how to give. 3 weeks into their new life, a letter arrived that changed everything. Eliza found it slipped under the door when she came home from the laundry, her name written in unfamiliar script. No return address. With trembling hands, she opened it. "Mrs. Blackwood," it read. or whatever name you're using now. Did you think you could run far enough? Did you think nobody would wonder about Samuel's death? About what's buried on that mountain? Some secrets don't stay buried. Someone who knows. She was sitting on the floor, letter crumpled in her fist. When Boone found her, "Eliza?" He was beside her instantly. "What is it? What's wrong?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. His face darkened as he read. "How?" she whispered. "How did they find us?" Could be anyone. Someone from Cedar Falls who heard talk, someone who knew Samuel or Torrance. He crumpled the letter further. Could even be a shot in the dark, fishing for a reaction. What do we do? He was quiet for a long moment. We could run again, head south to Mexico, or take a ship somewhere. Start over again. No. The word came out stronger than she felt. No more running. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. Then we wait, see if anything comes of it. Could be just someone trying to frighten you. He pulled her against him, and she let herself lean into his strength. I won't let anyone hurt you. Eliza, not again. That night, she made a decision. When he started to make his bed on the floor as usual, she caught his hand. Stay, she said simply. Eliza, I'm tired of being afraid. She interrupted. Tired of letting the past dictate what I can have. I want my life. Boone, our life. And I want it to start now. He studied her face in the lamplight. You're sure? Instead of answering, she drew him down for a kiss that left no room for doubt. That night, in their small cottage by the sea, they claimed each other fully, not in desperation or fear, but in hope, in the decision to build something worth protecting. Later, tangled together in the narrow bed, Eliza traced patterns on his chest and made another decision. I want to tell you something, she said, about Samuel's death, his hand stilled on her back. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. No secrets between us. She took a breath. I killed him? The words hung in the darkness. She felt Boone's heartbeat, steady under her palm. He came home drunk that night, she continued. More drunk than usual. Started raging about Torrance, about the body in the cellar, about how it was my fault somehow. He grabbed me, started dragging me toward the creek. Said he'd teach me to swim proper this time. Her voice was steady, almost detached. She'd never said these words aloud, never admitted the truth, even to herself. I fought back, harder than ever before. Maybe because I knew this time he wouldn't stop. This time he'd hold me under until there were no more bubbles. She closed her eyes. There was a rock. My hand found it in the mud. When he pushed my head under, I swung it, hard as I could. Good, Boone said quietly. He let go, stumbled back. I hit him again and again, until he fell into the creek. She was shaking now. I held him down, held him under like he'd done to me so many times. Watch the bubbles stop. Boone's arms tightened around her. He deserved it. Then I dragged him downstream, made it look like he'd fallen, hit his head. Went to town the next morning like nothing happened. Played the grieving widow when they found him. You survived, Boone said firmly. You did what you had to do to survive. I'm a murderer. You're alive. He tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes in the dim light. That's what matters. You're alive and free and building something good. Don't let his ghost take that from you. She searched his face, finding no judgment, no fear, just acceptance and something deeper, something that might be love. The letter, she said. What if whoever sent it knows? Then we deal with it together. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I've done my share of things that wouldn't stand up in court. Eliza shot men who probably could have been taken alive, made choices that haunt me, but I'd make them again to protect what matters. What matters? You, he said simply. This life we're building, that matters. The next morning brought no new threats, just another day of work and waves and slowly settling into their new existence. But Eliza found herself checking over her shoulder more often, startling at unexpected sounds. A week passed, then two. No more letters came. She began to relax, to believe it had been an empty threat. Then Willie Hartman mentioned casually that a man had been asking around the docks about newcomers to town. Pinkerton man, by the look of him, said he was investigating some business back in Colorado territory. You folks didn't come from there, did you? Wyoming. Boone lied smoothly. Up near the Tetons. That's what I figured. Told him we don't get many folks from Colorado way. Willie spat tobacco juice into the harbor. Don't much care for Pinkertons. Man wants to find someone. He should do his own legwork, not pay others to snoop. That night, they held a council of war in their kitchen. Pinkertons means someone with money hired him. Boone said, Torrance's family, maybe, or someone else with an interest. We should leave, Eliza said, though the words hurt. She'd grown to love their cottage, her job, the sound of the ocean at night. Maybe, or maybe we brazen it out. We've done nothing wrong here, built good reputations. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight. Before she could respond, a knock came at the door. They both froze. Another knock, more insistent. Boone motioned for her to stay back, his hand on his gun as he opened the door. A thin man in a dusty suit stood on their porch, holding a leather portfolio. Mr. Matheson? My name is James Carpenter. I'm with the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And? I'm looking for someone, a woman who might be traveling with a man of your description. He pulled out a photograph, one Eliza recognized. Her wedding portrait, taken years ago in Cedar Falls. Her name is Eliza Blackwood. There's questions about her husband's death and another man's disappearance. Eliza stepped into view. Decision made. I'm Eliza. The detective's eyes sharpened. Mrs. Blackwood. Not anymore. Blackwood died with my husband. She lifted her chin. What do you want? Carpenter studied her, then Boone, seeming to weigh his options. I've been hired to investigate certain matters. However, during my investigation, I've learned some interesting things about Samuel Blackwood's character, about his business dealings, about the number of people who had reason to want him dead. And I've also learned that Sheriff Bradley in Cedar Falls filed a report stating that the spring storms destroyed any evidence that might have existed, that Calvin Torrance was likely killed by Indians or claim jumpers, that Mrs. Blackwood left the territory to start a new life, which she's entitled to do. Eliza held her breath. My employer wants answers. Carpenter continued. But sometimes the best answer is that there are no answers to be found. Sometimes justice has already been served, just not in a courtroom. He tucked the photograph away. I'll be filing my report tomorrow. Case closed. No leads found. The widow Blackwood seems to have vanished as thoroughly as Calvin Torrance. He tipped his hat. Good evening to you both. Enjoy your new life here. It's a beautiful town. They watched him walk away, disappearing into the coastal fog. Eliza's knees gave out, and Boone caught her, holding her as the relief and delayed fear crashed over her in waves. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. Seems so. He helped her inside, poured whiskey for them both. Though I wonder who convinced him to look the other way. They never found out. Maybe Sheriff Bradley had reached out to old contacts. Maybe Carpenter had simply decided some truths weren't worth pursuing. Maybe the mountains kept their secrets after all. What mattered was that no one else came looking. The letter writer, whoever they were, never materialized. Life in Crescent Bay continued. Work and waves. Building friendships with the neighbors. Learning to live without constantly looking backward. And in their cottage by the sea, two scarred people slowly healed. Not all at once. Not without setbacks. There were still nights when Eliza woke gasping from dreams of drowning. Still moments when Boone stared too long at the horizon, seeing ghosts in the fog. But there were more good days than bad. Mornings when they woke tangled together. Afternoon walks on the beach. Evenings spent reading by the fire while the ocean sang its eternal song outside their window. Do you miss it? Eliza asked one night, 6 months into their new life. The wandering? The tracking? Boone considered, then shook his head. I was running too, in my way, chasing shadows, trying to outride my own ghosts. This," he gestured to encompass their small home, their life together. "This is better. Even though I'm a confessed murderer?" She kept her tone light, but the question was real. "Especially then," he pulled her close, "means you're strong enough to survive anything, strong enough to build something new from the ashes." She thought about that as she fell asleep in his arms, the ocean whispering promises through the window. They'd both done terrible things, carried darkness that would never fully fade. But here, at the edge of the world, they'd found something worth more than absolution. They'd found a reason to keep going, to keep building, to keep choosing hope over fear. And that, Eliza thought as sleep claimed her, was its own kind of salvation. Spring came to Crescent Bay in a riot of wildflowers and warming winds. Eliza stood in her small garden, hands deep in the earth, planting seeds that would bloom by summer. A year had passed since they'd fled the mountains, and the life they'd built here had taken root as surely as these vegetables would. Letter came. Boone called from the porch. Her hands stilled for just a moment. Old habits died hard, before she continued planting. Letters rarely brought good news in her experience, but she'd learned to face whatever came. She found him at the kitchen table, an opened envelope before him. His expression was unreadable. "What is it?" "It's from Tom Bradley." He handed her the letter. "Samuel's brother came looking for you, wanted to claim the property, what's left of it." Her blood chilled as she read. Joseph Blackwood, Samuel's younger brother from Missouri, had arrived in Cedar Falls with a lawyer, claiming rights to his brother's estate. Bradley had told him the property was storm-damaged beyond salvage, the widow long gone to parts unknown. "But Joseph didn't believe it," she read aloud. "Says he's hiring investigators, won't stop until he finds the woman who killed his brother and stole his legacy. Tom warns us to be careful," Boone said. "Joseph's got money and a grudge." Eliza set down the letter, surprised to find her hands steady. A year ago, this news would have sent her into panic. Now she felt only a tired irritation. "Samuel used to talk about Joseph sometimes," she said. "Another cruel man who thought the world owed him everything." They hadn't spoken in years, but blood calls to blood, I suppose. "We could leave," Boone offered, but she heard the reluctance in his voice. They'd built something here, friendships, routines, a life that fit them like comfortable clothes. "No." She moved to the window, looking out at their small slice of ocean. "I'm done running. If Joseph wants to waste his money searching for ghosts, let him." But the seed of worry had been planted. Over the following weeks, she found herself watching strangers more carefully, noting unfamiliar faces at the market. When a well-dressed man spent too long examining the freight wagons where Boone worked, her stomach clenched with familiar fear. "You're seeing shadows," Boone told her gently one evening as she peered through the curtains for the third time. "Joseph Blackwood doesn't even know what name we're using." He was right. She knew. They'd been careful. Eliza had never officially taken Boone's name, still going simply by her first name at work. Their neighbors knew them as a quiet couple who kept to themselves, paid their rent on time, and caused no trouble. Still, the worry gnawed at her until one morning at the laundry. "Mrs." Chen pulled her aside. "You are troubled," the older woman said. It wasn't a question. "Old ghosts," Eliza admitted. "Sometimes they reach out from the past." "Mrs." Chen nodded knowingly. "I understand old ghosts. My husband, he had many enemies in San Francisco. We came here to escape them." She patted Eliza's arm. "But you know what I learned? Ghosts have power only if you feed them fear. Starve them instead. Live your life. Be happy. That is best revenge on past." That evening, Eliza made a decision. When Boone came home from work, she met him at the door. "Marry me," she said. He stopped dead, dust still settling around his boots. "What? You heard me." She took his hands, rough and calloused from honest work. "I've been living in fear of shadows and names and papers, but I choose you, Boone Matheson. I choose this life. So marry me. Make it real in every way that matters." Eliza. His voice was rough with emotion. You know I want that, but your past is past. She squeezed his hands. I'm not Eliza Blackwood anymore. Haven't been for a long time. I want to be Eliza Matheson, if you'll have me. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. If I'll have you. Woman, I've been yours since you dragged me in from that blizzard. They were married the following Saturday by the town's circuit preacher, with Willie Hartman and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. It was nothing like her first wedding. No fancy dress, no crowds of people she barely knew. Just a simple ceremony on the bluff overlooking the ocean. The waves providing music and the setting sun painting everything gold. Do you, Eliza, take this man? The preacher intoned. I do, she said, the words carrying weight her first vows never had. This was choice, freely made. This was claiming her future with both hands. When Boone kissed her as the preacher pronounced them married, she tasted salt air and promise and the sweet freedom of a life self-determined. Willie had arranged a small reception at the local tavern. Half the town seemed to show up, bringing food and good wishes. Eliza found herself overwhelmed by the warmth of it. She'd been so focused on survival, she hadn't realized how many connections they'd made. Beautiful ceremony, said Martha Henley, who ran the general store with her husband. Though I must say, we all wondered when you two would make it official. Been living as married folks already. Eliza blushed, but Boone just laughed. Sometimes the heart knows before the law catches up. As the evening wore on, filled with music and dancing and more kindness than Eliza had known in years, she felt something finally settle in her chest. This was home. These people were her community. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The test came sooner than expected. 2 weeks after the wedding, Eliza was walking home from the laundry when she saw him, a man watching their cottage from across the street. Well-dressed, unfamiliar, with the patient stillness of someone used to surveillance. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to walk normally. At the door, she fumbled with her key, using the moment to glance back. He was writing in a small notebook. Inside, she moved quickly to the window. The man lingered a few more minutes, then walked toward town. She was still watching when Boone came home early, his expression grim. There was a man at the freight office, he said, asking questions about employees. Willie told him nothing, but I saw him watching our house. She turned from the window. It's happening, isn't it? Joseph found us. Boone pulled her close. Maybe, or maybe it's unrelated. Either way, we stay calm. We've done nothing wrong here. But that night, neither of them slept well. Every sound seemed threatening, every shadow suspect. By morning, Eliza had made another decision. I want to confront him, she said over breakfast. If it's Joseph or his man, I want to face it head on. Eliza, no, listen, I've spent 3 years afraid. First of Samuel, then of discovery, now of his brother. I'm tired of it. She met his eyes steadily. You taught me to shoot. I've learned to stand up for myself. Let me use it. Boone studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Together. Then, we face it together. They didn't have long to wait. That afternoon, as they walked along the harbor, the watching man approached them. Up close, Eliza could see the family resemblance, the same cold eyes as Samuel, the same cruel set to his mouth. Mrs. Blackwood, Joseph said, his voice cultured where Samuel's had been rough. Or should I say, Mrs. Matheson, you've led me quite a chase. Mr. Blackwood. She was proud of how steady her voice came out. What do you want? Justice for my brother. And what's rightfully mine? His land. His assets. His eyes glittered with the same greed she'd seen in Samuel. You had no right to abandon the property. No right to remarry so quickly. A proper widow would have mourned. Your brother was not a man worth mourning, Eliza said quietly. Joseph's face darkened. How dare you? I dare, because it's true. She stepped forward, Boone a solid presence beside her. Ask anyone in Cedar Falls about Samuel Blackwood. Ask about the bruises I wore like jewelry. Ask about the nights I couldn't leave the house because my face was too marked to explain away. Lies, Joseph spat. Samuel wrote me about you, a difficult woman. He said, needed a firm hand. Is that what he called it? Eliza pulled back her sleeve, revealing old scars. A firm hand? Joseph's eyes flickered, but his expression didn't soften. Whatever Samuel did or didn't do, you had no right to steal what was his. I stole nothing. I survived. She let her sleeve fall. The property is gone, destroyed by storms. There's nothing left for you there but mud and memories. We'll see about that. My lawyer says, your lawyer can say whatever he wants. Boone interrupted, his voice carrying quiet menace. But you'll leave my wife alone. You've found her, seen she's alive and remarried. That's all you needed to know. Joseph turned his cold gaze on Boone. And you are. The man who'll protect her from any more Blackwood cruelty. Boone's hand rested casually near his gun. The war's over, Mr. Blackwood. Time to bury the dead and move on. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Joseph smiled, an expression that held no warmth. This isn't over, he said. I know there's more to Samuel's death than a simple drowning. I'll prove it. Prove what you like, Eliza said. It won't bring him back, and it won't give you whatever you're really looking for. Joseph's mask slipped for just a moment, showing the desperate greed beneath. Then he straightened his coat and walked away without another word. He'll be back, Boone said quietly. Maybe. Eliza took his arm, turning toward home. But we'll be ready. They spent the next days waiting. But Joseph didn't return. Through Willie's connections, they learned he was staying at the hotel, making inquiries around town. But the people of Crescent Bay had closed ranks around their own. No one had information about the quiet couple who worked hard and minded their business. On the fourth day, Sheriff Mason knocked on their door, a gruff man who'd seen too much. He got straight to the point. Got a telegram from Sheriff Bradley in Cedar Falls, he said. Warns me there's a man stirring up old trouble. Says you folks might need looking after. We don't want any trouble, Eliza said. Don't reckon you do. Mason spat tobacco juice off the porch. That's why I'm here. This Joseph Blackwood's been making noise about hiring thugs, forcing answers. Well, we don't hold with that here. Sheriff, ma'am, I don't know your past and don't care to. What I know is you're good folks who've been part of this town for over a year now. That counts for something. He adjusted his gun belt. Mr. Blackwood's been encouraged to move along. Train leaves tomorrow morning. He'll be on it. Relief flooded through Eliza. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your neighbors. Mrs., Chen, Willie, the Henleys. They all spoke for you. That matters in a town like this. He tipped his hat. You folks have a good evening. They watched him leave, then stood together on their small porch, looking out at the town that had become their sanctuary. It's really over, Eliza said wonderingly. He's leaving. Maybe. Men like that don't give up easy. Boone pulled her close. But we've got something he doesn't, a place we belong, people who'll stand with us. That night, they walked to the bluff where they'd been married. The moon was full, turning the ocean to molten silver. Ships' lights bobbed on the horizon, each one carrying its own cargo of dreams and sorrows. Do you ever regret it? Boone asked. The life we might have had if none of this had happened? Eliza considered the question. In another life, she might have been a proper widow, mourning a husband she'd hated while slowly withering away in that mountain cabin. Or perhaps Samuel would have eventually killed her, held her under the water 1 second too long. No, she said finally. Every terrible thing led me here, led me to you. She turned to face him. I wouldn't change that. He kissed her then, there on the bluff with the ocean as witness. When they broke apart, she saw her own joy reflected in his eyes. Come on, Mrs. Matheson, he said, offering his arm. Let's go home. They walked back through the quiet streets, past the houses of friends and neighbors, past the laundry where she'd found honest work and the freight office where he'd rebuilt his life. Their cottage waited, lamplight warm in the windows, a beacon of everything they'd fought to claim. Inside, as Eliza prepared for bed, she found herself humming some half-remembered tune from childhood. She caught Boone watching her with a soft expression. "What? First time I've heard you sing," he said. "It's nice." She laughed, suddenly light with an emotion she barely recognized as pure happiness. There's probably a lot of firsts still ahead. Looking forward to every one of them. Later, wrapped in his arms with the ocean singing its endless lullaby, Eliza thought about the long journey that had brought them here. From a cabin prison in the mountains to a cottage by the sea. From drowning in fear to breathing free. From surviving to truly living. Tomorrow, Joseph Blackwood would board his train, carrying his bitterness back to Missouri. The ghosts would settle back into silence, and life would go on. Simple, precious, ordinary life. Work at the laundry, evenings with Boone, gardens to tend and neighbors to visit, and maybe, someday, children to raise in the salt air and freedom. She'd killed a man to win this life, buried secrets and burned bridges and run until the land ran out. But here at the edge of the world, she'd found what had always eluded her in those mountain heights. Peace. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, the words still new enough to feel dangerous. "And I love you," Boone replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Today, tomorrow, always." The ocean agreed, whispering its approval against the shore. And in a small cottage in Crescent Bay, two survivors who'd found their way to each other finally rested, knowing that some storms cleared the way for calmer seas, and some endings were really beginnings in disguise. Outside, the fog rolled in from the Pacific, wrapping the town in soft gray silence. By morning, it would lift, revealing the world washed clean and new. But for now, there was only the night and the peace and the promise of all the dawns yet to come. They'd earned every one of them. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you've enjoyed following Eliza and Boone on their journey from tragedy to triumph. Where are you listening from today? Please share your location in the comments so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and let us know your thoughts about this story. Did the ending satisfy you? What was your favorite part? We'd love to hear from you.